You know, I was traveling on a train recently, and I found myself in a very interesting situation. I was sitting in my seat, reading a book, when two people nearby got into a heated argument. It started with something small. Someone's bag was blocking the aisle, but within minutes it escalated. Voices were raised, accusations were flying, personal attacks were being made, and everyone in that train compartment became an unwilling audience to this drama. Now, here's what fascinated me. As this argument was intensifying, there was an elderly gentleman sitting across from me. He was witnessing everything just like the rest of us, and I could see in his eyes that he understood what was happening. He could probably see the ego clashes, the miscommunication, the unnecessary escalation. But you know what he did? Nothing. He remained completely silent, not in an indifferent way, not in a cold way, but in a way that showed tremendous wisdom. He didn't try to intervene. He didn't offer his opinion. He didn't take sides. He simply sat there with a calm presence. Eventually, the argument burned itself out. The two people exhausted themselves with their words and sat down, embarrassed and drained. And as they did, that elderly gentleman caught my eye and gave me the slightest smile. A smile that said, some battles don't need to be fought. Some words don't need to be spoken. Some situations are best met with silence. After the train journey, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Because in our world today, we have an epidemic of too much talking. We talk when we should listen. We speak when we should observe. We react when we should reflect. We have opinions about everything, and we feel compelled to share them all. Social media has made it worse. Every event, every news story, every controversy, we feel we must comment. We must share our view. We must let everyone know where we stand. And in this constant noise, in this endless stream of words, we've forgotten something sacred. We've forgotten the power of silence. We've forgotten that sometimes the most intelligent response is no response. We've forgotten that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say nothing at all. But this doesn't mean being passive. This doesn't mean being weak. This doesn't mean being indifferent to what's happening around us. Strategic silence, conscious silence, wise silence, this is actually a sign of great strength, great maturity, great wisdom. Today, I want to share with you 5 specific situations where silence is not just beneficial, but essential. 5 situations where choosing to remain silent can save you from unnecessary trouble, protect your peace, preserve your relationships, and demonstrate your wisdom. And I promise you, if you can master the art of silence in these 5 situations, your life will transform, your relationships will improve, your mind will be calmer, your reputation will be stronger, and you'll move through life with a grace and dignity that few people possess. So let me ask you, are you ready to learn when to speak and when to stay silent? Are you ready to discover the profound power that exists in choosing your words carefully? Good. Then let's explore this together. My dear friends, thank you for being here with open hearts and open minds. Before we dive into the 5 situations, I want to share something important with you. In ancient wisdom traditions, there's a beautiful teaching. It says that speech is silver, but silence is golden. Think about that for a moment. If speech is valuable, silence is even more valuable. If words have power, the absence of words has even greater power. But in our modern world, we've completely reversed this. We think that speaking is always better than staying silent. We think that sharing our opinion is always necessary. We think that not responding means we're weak, or we don't care, or we're letting something slide. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was once a great spiritual master who had thousands of disciples. People would come from far and wide to hear him speak. One day a young man travelled for many days to reach this master. When he finally arrived, he requested a private audience. The master agreed. They sat together in a room. The young man waited for the master to speak, to share wisdom, to give teaching. But the master remained silent. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2 hours. The young man became increasingly uncomfortable. He fidgeted, he looked around, he cleared his throat, but the master simply sat there, eyes closed, completely at peace. Finally, after 3 hours, the young man couldn't take it any more. He said, "Master, I came here to learn from you, but you haven't said a single word." The master opened his eyes, smiled gently, and said, "And what have you learned?" The young man paused. He thought deeply, and then he realized something profound. In those 3 hours of silence, his mind had gradually quieted down. The constant chatter in his head had slowed. He had become more present, more aware, more conscious, and he said to the master, "I learned that I don't need to fill every moment with words. I learned that silence itself is a teacher. I learned that sometimes the greatest wisdom is transmitted not through speaking, but through being." The master nodded and said, "Now you're ready to learn." This story reveals something crucial. We're so addicted to noise, to stimulation, to constant communication, that we've lost touch with the profound peace and wisdom that exists in silence. We're uncomfortable with quiet. We're afraid of the empty space. We rush to fill it with words, with opinions, with reactions. And in doing so, we miss the opportunity to truly listen, to truly reflect, to truly understand before we respond. Now, I also want to address something before we continue. Some of you might be thinking, "But Gaur Gopal, isn't it important to speak up? Isn't it important to use our voice? Aren't there times when silence is actually harmful?" And you're absolutely right. There are definitely times when we must speak. When we witness injustice, we should speak. When someone is being harmed, we should speak. When we have knowledge that can help someone, we should speak. When we need to set boundaries, we should speak. Silence is not about being a doormat. It's not about suppressing your truth. It's not about allowing wrongdoing to continue unchecked. The silence I'm talking about is strategic, discerning, wise silence. It's about choosing when to engage and when to refrain. It's about understanding that not every situation requires your input. Not every argument needs your participation. Not every provocation deserves your response. It's about having the wisdom to know the difference. And that's what we're going to explore today. The specific situations where silence serves you better than speech, where restraint demonstrates more strength than reaction, where holding your tongue protects you more than speaking your mind. Now let's talk about the real problem. Why is it so difficult for us to remain silent in situations where silence would clearly serve us better? What is it that drives us to speak when we should really stay quiet? The first issue is ego. Our ego desperately wants to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. When someone says something we disagree with, our ego feels threatened. It jumps up and says, "You must correct them. You must prove them wrong. You must defend your position." When someone criticizes us, our ego feels attacked. It demands that we fight back, that we defend ourselves, that we prove our worth. When someone shares good news and our life is struggling, our ego feels diminished. It wants to minimize their success or talk about our own achievements to feel equal. The ego cannot stand to be silent because silence feels like surrender to the ego. Silence feels like weakness. Silence feels like you're letting someone else win. But here's the truth. The ego is a false sense of self. It's not who you really are. And every time you let your ego dictate your words, you're not being authentic. You're being reactive. You're being controlled by a part of yourself that's rooted in fear and insecurity. The second problem is our addiction to drama. We live in a world that thrives on drama. Reality TV, social media, controversies, gossip, scandals, we're surrounded by it. And subconsciously, we've learned that drama is entertaining. Drama gives us something to talk about. Drama makes us feel alive. So when a dramatic situation presents itself, when there's conflict or controversy, there's a part of us that wants to jump in, that wants to engage, that wants to add our voice to the chaos. Even if it doesn't serve us, even if it drains our energy, even if it creates problems for us later, we can't help ourselves. We're drawn to the drama like moths to a flame. The third problem is the fear of being forgotten. We live in an attention economy. On social media, silence often means invisibility. If you're not posting, if you're not commenting, if you're not sharing your opinion on the latest topic, you feel like you're fading into the background. So we speak to be remembered, we comment to stay relevant, we share our opinions to prove we exist, that we matter, that we're still here, but this is exhausting, this is draining, and ironically, this constant need to speak often makes us less memorable, not more. Because when everyone is shouting, the person who speaks with intentionality, who chooses their words carefully, who knows when to be silent, that person stands out. The fourth issue is lack of self-control. For many of us, speaking is a habit. We react without thinking. Someone says something, and words are out of our mouth before we've even processed what was said. Someone provokes us, and we immediately fire back. Someone shares misinformation, and we jump in to correct them. We lack the pause between stimulus and response. We lack the discipline to stop, breathe, think, and then choose whether to speak or remain silent. And this lack of self-control gets us into so much trouble. We say things we regret. We damage relationships unnecessarily. We get pulled into conflicts that have nothing to do with us. We waste our precious energy on things that don't matter. The fifth problem, and this one is subtle but powerful, is the belief that our opinion is always needed. We overestimate the importance of our input. We think that every conversation requires our contribution. We think that every debate needs our perspective. We think that every situation will be incomplete without our words. But the reality is, most situations will resolve themselves perfectly fine without our involvement. Most arguments will end whether or not we participate. Most controversies will pass whether or not we add our voice. Our opinion, as valuable as it might be to us, is often not as necessary as we think it is. And when we understand this, when we realize that the world will keep spinning without our constant commentary, we free ourselves from the compulsion to always speak. So what's the solution? What are these 5 situations where silence is golden? Let me share them with you, and as I do, I want you to reflect honestly on how often you've spoken in these situations and what the consequences were. The first situation where you should be silent is when you're angry. This is perhaps the most important one. When anger is coursing through your body, when your heart is racing, when your mind is flooded with emotion, that is absolutely not the time to speak. Why? Because anger makes you stupid. I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean it literally. When you're angry, the primitive part of your brain takes over. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thinking and good judgment, goes offline. And in that state, you will say things you don't mean. You will say things that are exaggerated. You will say things that are cruel. You will say things that you can never take back. I've seen relationships destroyed because someone spoke in anger. Marriages ended, friendships broken, professional reputations ruined, all because in a moment of anger someone said something they could never unsay. There's an ancient teaching that says, speak when you're angry and you'll make the best speech you'll ever regret. So when anger arises, and it will arise because we're human, your job is not to speak. Your job is to be silent. Walk away if you need to. Take deep breaths. Count to 10 or 100 or 1,000. Do whatever it takes to let the anger subside. And then, when you're calm, when you can think clearly, when you can speak with intention rather than reaction, then you can address the situation. The second situation where you should be silent is when you don't have all the facts. In our world of instant news and social media, we're constantly exposed to stories, events, and controversies, and we feel pressure to immediately respond, to share our opinion, to take a side. But so often, the initial story is incomplete. Details are missing, context is absent, facts are wrong, and if you speak too quickly, if you react based on partial information, you will often find yourself on the wrong side of truth. You will have to backtrack. You will have to apologize. You will lose credibility. So the wise approach is to wait, to gather information, to seek multiple perspectives, to understand the full picture before you form an opinion, and certainly before you share that opinion with others. Silence in the face of incomplete information is not ignorance. It's wisdom. It's saying, I don't know enough yet to speak intelligently about this, so I'll wait until I do. The third situation where you should be silent is when someone is venting. You know this situation. A friend calls you, upset about something. A family member shares their frustration. A colleague complains about their boss. And what do most of us do? We immediately try to fix it. We offer advice. We suggest solutions. We tell them what they should do. But here's what I've learned. Most of the time, people don't want solutions. They just want to be heard. They want to express their emotion. They want to feel validated. They want someone to simply be present with them in their pain. When you jump in with advice, even well-intentioned advice, you're actually doing several unhelpful things. You're minimizing their emotions by suggesting the problem is easily fixable. You're making it about you and your wisdom rather than about them and their experience. You're preventing them from processing their emotions fully and perhaps finding their own solutions. So in these moments, the gift you can give is the gift of your silent, compassionate presence. Listen deeply, nod, show empathy through your body language, and only if they specifically ask, what do you think I should do, should you offer advice. Otherwise, your loving silence is the greatest support you can provide. The fourth situation where you should be silent is when you're tempted to gossip. Gossip is speaking about someone who's not present, usually in a negative or judgmental way. And it's one of the most destructive forms of speech. When you gossip, you damage 3 people. You damage the person you're gossiping about by spreading information or judgments about them behind their back. You damage the person you're gossiping with by pulling them into negative energy and potentially changing their perception of someone based on your biased perspective. And most significantly, you damage yourself. You damage your integrity, you damage your character, you damage your peace of mind, because when you speak negatively about others, there's a part of you that knows it's wrong, and that internal conflict creates stress. So, when the conversation turns to gossip, when someone starts sharing negative information about someone else, that's your cue to be silent. Don't engage, don't add to it. Don't ask questions that encourage more gossip. You can change the subject, you can excuse yourself, or you can simply remain quiet. And if you're feeling brave, you can even say, I'd rather not discuss this person when they're not here to share their side. The fifth and final situation where you should be silent is when you've already made your point. This one is subtle but so important. In arguments or discussions, there's often a tendency to keep explaining, keep justifying, keep repeating ourselves. We think if we just say it one more time, in one more way, the other person will finally understand and agree. But that's not how it works. If someone hasn't understood or accepted your point after you've clearly explained it once or twice, saying it 10 more times won't help. In fact, it will hurt. It will make you seem pushy, aggressive, or insecure. It will make the other person defensive and even less likely to consider your perspective. It will turn a conversation into a battle of wills. So once you've clearly expressed your perspective, once you've shared your thoughts or feelings, stop. Be silent. Give the other person space to process. Give them time to reflect. Trust that your words have been heard, even if they haven't been immediately accepted. And remember, you cannot control how others receive your message. You can only control how clearly and respectfully you deliver it. After that, silence allows for possibility, for reflection, for change to happen organically rather than through force. Now, my dear friends, understanding these 5 situations is valuable, but the real transformation happens when you actually implement this wisdom in your life. So I want to give you very practical, specific strategies you can use starting right now to cultivate the power of strategic silence. First, I want you to create what I call the pause practice. This is simple but revolutionary. Before you speak in any charged situation, pause, count to 5 in your mind, just 5 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In those 5 seconds, ask yourself 3 questions. Is what I'm about to say true? Is what I'm about to say necessary? Is what I'm about to say kind? If the answer to any of these questions is no, don't say it. Stay silent. These 5 seconds create space between stimulus and response. They engage your prefrontal cortex. They give you back control. And over time, this pause will become automatic. You'll find yourself naturally stopping to think before you speak. Second practice, start keeping what I call a silence journal. For the next 7 days, I want you to pay attention to your communication. At the end of each day, write down the times you spoke when you should have remained silent. Be honest with yourself. Did you react in anger? Did you gossip? Did you speak without knowing all the facts? Did you give unsolicited advice? Did you keep repeating yourself unnecessarily? Write it down. And next to each instance, write what you could have done differently. What would silence have looked like in that situation? What would have been the benefit of staying quiet? This practice creates awareness. And awareness is the first step toward change. You cannot change patterns you're not aware of. Third, I want you to practice what I call the 24-hour rule. For anger, make a commitment to yourself that when you're angry, you will not say anything about the situation for 24 hours. Not to the person you're angry with, not to other people, not on social media, nothing. For 24 hours, you process the anger internally. You write in a journal if you need to express it. You go for a walk. You exercise, you meditate. You do whatever helps you process emotion in a healthy way. And then, after 24 hours, if you still feel like the issue needs to be addressed, you can speak. But you'll speak from a place of calm. You'll speak with clarity. You'll speak with the intention to resolve rather than to wound. You'll be amazed at how many issues resolve themselves in 24 hours, issues that would have escalated into major conflicts if you had reacted immediately. Fourth practice, develop the art of the graceful exit. Sometimes staying silent in a situation means removing yourself from that situation entirely. If people around you are gossiping, excuse yourself. I need to make a call, or I should get back to work, or simply excuse me. If an argument is escalating and you feel yourself getting triggered, remove yourself. I need some time to think about this. Can we continue this conversation later? If social media is pulling you into unnecessary drama, log off, close the app, walk away. Silence isn't just about not speaking. It's about not engaging with energy that doesn't serve you, and sometimes that requires physically removing yourself from the situation. Fifth, find a practice that helps you get comfortable with silence. This could be meditation, where you sit in silence and simply observe your thoughts without acting on them. This could be mindful walking in nature, where you walk without your phone, without music, just in silence with your surroundings. This could be designated quiet time, where for even 15 minutes a day, you practice being completely silent. No talking, no texting, no consuming content, just you and silence. The more comfortable you become with silence externally, the easier it becomes to choose silence in challenging situations, because you're not afraid of the quiet. You're not anxious to fill the space. You understand that silence itself is powerful. Sixth, create a personal mantra for difficult moments. Mine is very simple. Not everything needs my response. When I feel the urge to react, to speak, to defend, to correct, I repeat this to myself. Not everything needs my response. Find a mantra that resonates with you. It could be silence is strength. It could be choose peace over being right. It could be this too shall pass without my words. Whatever it is, memorize it. And use it as an anchor when you're tempted to speak in one of those 5 situations. Finally, start recognizing and celebrating your silence victories. When you successfully remain silent in a situation where you would have normally reacted, acknowledge it. Celebrate it, tell your accountability partner, write it in your journal, pat yourself on the back, because choosing silence when every fiber of your being wants to speak, that takes tremendous strength. That deserves recognition, and when you celebrate these victories, you reinforce the behavior. You train your brain that silence feels good, that silence leads to better outcomes, that silence is a superpower worth cultivating. My dear friends, as we come to the close of our time together, I want to share one final story with you. There was once a monastery where the monks took a vow of silence. They were allowed to speak only 2 words every 7 years. A young man joined this monastery, full of enthusiasm and commitment. 7 years passed. It was time for him to speak his 2 words. The head monk asked, "What are your 2 words?" The young man said, "Bed hard." The head monk nodded, and the man went back to his silence. Another 7 years passed. The man, now not so young, came before the head monk again. "What are your 2 words?" The head monk asked. The man said, "Food bad." The head monk nodded again, and the man returned to his silence. 7 more years went by. The man, now much older, appeared before the head monk once more. "What are your 2 words?" The man said, "I quit." And the head monk replied, "I'm not surprised. You've done nothing but complain since you got here." Now, this story is humorous, but it carries a deep teaching. When we speak so rarely, when we use words so sparingly, the words we do choose reveal our true nature. That man spoke only 6 words in 21 years, and all 6 were complaints. What does that tell us? It tells us that the problem wasn't his circumstances. The problem was his mindset. Whether he spoke those complaints daily or once every 7 years, the negativity was there. This story teaches us something crucial. Silence is not just about not speaking. Silence is also about observing our inner world. When you practice strategic silence, when you create space between your thoughts and your words, you get to see what's actually going on inside you. You get to witness your judgments, your reactions, your patterns, your ego, and that awareness is transformative. Because when you see these patterns clearly, you can start to change them. You can start to cultivate more positive thoughts, more compassionate reactions, more wisdom. So silence becomes not just a communication strategy, but a spiritual practice, a way of knowing yourself more deeply, a path to greater consciousness. I also want to acknowledge something important. Learning to be silent in these 5 situations is not easy, especially if you've spent your whole life being reactive, being opinionated, being vocal. Your ego will fight you. Your habits will pull you back. You will fail sometimes. You will speak when you should have been silent, and that's okay. This is not about perfection. This is about progress. Every time you successfully choose silence over reaction, you're rewiring your brain. Every time you pause before speaking, you're building new neural pathways. Every time you walk away from drama, you're strengthening your self-control. It's like going to the gym. You don't build muscles overnight. You build them through consistent practice, one repetition at a time. The same is true for the muscle of strategic silence. You build it one choice at a time, one pause at a time, one conscious decision at a time. And I want to tell you what happens when you master this skill. When you become someone who speaks with intentionality and knows when to be silent, people start to trust you more. They trust you with their secrets because they know you won't gossip. They trust your opinions because when you do speak, your words are thoughtful and measured. They trust your presence because you're not constantly reacting and adding to the chaos. You also become more respected. There's a gravitas, a weight, a power that comes from someone who doesn't need to fill every silence, someone who can sit comfortably with not speaking, someone who chooses their battles wisely. Additionally, your relationships improve dramatically. Think about it. No more fights escalated by angry words. No more misunderstandings from speaking without facts. No more damaged friendships from gossip. No more pushing people away by repeating yourself endlessly. When you master strategic silence, you create space for others, space for them to express themselves fully, space for them to process their emotions, space for real connection to happen, and perhaps most importantly, you experience more peace. Because so much of our stress comes from our mouths, from the arguments we engage in, from the drama we participate in, from the defending and explaining and justifying we feel compelled to do. When you stop feeding that cycle, when you choose silence, you reclaim your peace. You protect your energy. You preserve your serenity. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here today, for being willing to explore this teaching, for being open to the possibility that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Remember the 5 situations. When you're angry, be silent. When you don't have all the facts, be silent. When someone is venting, be silent. When tempted to gossip, be silent. When you've already made your point, be silent. These 5 guidelines alone, if practiced consistently, will transform your life. They'll save you from countless regrets. They'll protect you from unnecessary conflicts. They'll elevate your character and your reputation. And as you practice this, as you cultivate the power of strategic silence, remember that you're not being weak, you're not being passive, you're not being indifferent, you're being wise, you're being strong, you're being conscious, you're choosing your words carefully because you understand their power. You're choosing silence strategically because you understand its value. You're choosing peace over being right because you understand what truly matters. Go forward, my friends, with the confidence that sometimes the strongest statement you can make is no statement at all. Sometimes the most profound response is no response. Sometimes the wisest words are no words. Be silent in these 5 situations and watch your life transform. Watch your relationships deepen. Watch your peace expand. Watch your wisdom grow. Thank you, and may you find the strength to harness the sacred power of silence.